Hi, thanks for joining us for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. I'm Chris Cooper. It's time to plant. Today we're going to see how to plant warm season vegetables. Also, landscaping takes a lot of planning. Kara Reese is going to show us some things you should consider before you buy a plant or pick up a shovel. That's just ahead on the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South.
Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by Goodwin's Landscape and Garden Center in Germantown since 1943 and continuing to offer its plants for successful gardening with 7 greenhouses and 3 acres of plants, plus comprehensive landscape services. International Paper Foundation, the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the Family Plot. I'm Chris Cooper. Joining me today is Tom Mashore. Mr. Tom is a master gardener in Tipton County, and Carol Reese will be joining us later. Ms. Carol is a horticulture specialist with UT Extension. All right, Mr. Tom.
Well,
we're out here and we're about to what? Plant tomatoes and peppers.
Yeah, we're going to start off with tomatoes. Okay. Sure. Now, with tomatoes, I like to get my stakes in first, and then plant the tomatoes after I get the stakes. Okay, we're going to start off. All 3 tomato varieties are indeterminates, which means as long as weather conditions are right, they keep growing and growing and growing. Determinates, which we don't have today, are ones that will only get to about 4.5, 5 feet, and they stop growing. But they're also very good producers. First thing I like to do is add some soil amendment.
So we're going to incorporate that soil amendment into the soil.
Right? Mix it in with the soil, approximately 50-50.
Okay.
You notice there's a little clay in this soil. Yeah. The amendment will help the water percolate through, and of course, like I said, the worms using it.
Okay.
Now, the type I'm using right here is a combination of compost and manure, and it's got a pretty good fertilizer level on it, so I don't have to add other fertilizers.
So you incorporate it in pretty good in the soil?
Yeah, I try to. Okay, this particular variety we're planting is Better Boy. Now, one of the things I like to do is remove the peat pot, because I find that sometimes this peat pot restricts root development or penetration, so I just get rid of it. If you notice, the roots are all gathered underneath the peat pot and have not actually gone through it. Taking rid of the peat pot will allow those roots to start spreading and developing. This particular variety is called Better Boy. Again, it's an indeterminate and produces good-sized tomatoes.
So you
excuse me?
So you have to tickle the roots before you put them in, or?
No, not really.
Okay, you just put them in like that?
Yeah, because you know, they kind of fall apart on their own.
Yeah, yeah.
And I like to make the hole at least twice the size as the root ball, but you want to plant it about the same depth that it was in the container. By loosening the soil around the plant, it has an easier opportunity to spread. The bigger the roots, the bigger the plant. Also, when you water always out to the drip line. Right now the drip line is at the outer edges. As the plant grows, the roots are going to get bigger, you water out further. And the reason for that is you want to encourage those roots to spread around, and water will be a good way of doing it. You notice I'm using a watering can because I have much better control than I would be using this, or a hose for that matter. Make sure you put the label back so you can remember what kind of plant it was. And the plant is planted. Now, I did put the stakes in before retaping, and I always put the plant on the opposite side of where these notches are, so when I tie it up, I can tie it up and that will hold it. Okay. It keeps it from sliding down.
I think that's pretty smart.
It works.
It works.
Yep.
Good deal.
Shall we move on to the next one?
All right, let's move on.
Okie dokie. Again, the same procedure. that we're going to plant this tomato pretty much the same way. But the unique thing about this and the next tomato, this one's a big beef, is that they are heat-tolerant tomatoes. What does that mean? Well, 95, if not more, % of the tomatoes grown, they don't like the heat. Matter of fact, all vegetables, that, to the best of my knowledge, is classified as either cool season or warm season. You don't find any vegetables listed as cold season or hot season. Tomatoes is a cool season, warm season vegetable, but what happens is that it's producing when it's nice in springtime and early summer, that they produce a lot of tomatoes. But when the nighttime temperatures get above 74 degrees and they stay there, they stop setting tomatoes. Well, what happens? Well, no big deal at first, because the other tomatoes that got set will keep you in tomatoes. But then there's going to be that dry spell, and they won't start setting tomatoes again until the evening temperatures start dropping. By the time frost comes, you have a whole bunch of green tomatoes. Of course, we're in the South, so a lot of people like fried green tomatoes. Heat-tolerant tomatoes, on the other hand, continue to set tomatoes even through the heat of the summer. It doesn't like it, but it can tolerate it. For the most part, most cherry tomatoes, grape tomatoes, are heat tolerant. Some other varieties are also heat tolerant, and this particular one is Big Beef is a heat tolerant tomato. Now we're going to add my...
Okay. Add your special mix, right?
Yeah, again, about 50-50. I remove the peat pot. And by the way, a peat pot can go into your compost pile. Or you can bury it or do whatever you like with it. It is organic. Again, bigger hole, plant it at the same depth it was in the pot.
All right.
Put the soil around it. I like to press it down a little bit, which has a tendency to push the roots out that way. And I think it says it's ready for a drink of water.
It's about ready to go. Now, is it okay to have those leaves right there touching the soil surface? Do we need to pinch those leaves off?
You know, that's a good point. That is a good point. I usually wait till they're a little bit bigger.
Okay.
Because one of the problems with tomatoes are susceptible to all kinds of problems.
Yeah.
Blights, early blight, late blight, red blight, blue blight, pink blight. If it's a blight, it's going to get it. And it comes from the soil. If the leaves are touching the ground, especially when they get a little bit bigger, when we really get hot, you get water splotch from watering it or from the rain splashing the soil onto the lower leaves. It's a good way of spreading the disease. So usually you want to put them off, but I usually wait till they're a little bit bigger. Any more questions about tomatoes?
Yeah. You have this here. What is
Oh
this?
yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't meant to mention.
What do we use this for?
Well, this stake, this is a 6-foot stake. We got 12 inches of the ground. It's only 5 feet tall out of the ground.
All right.
With these, all these are indeterminates, which means as long as weather conditions are going, they're going to keep growing, growing, growing. Well, being in the South, by the time we get the 1st of June, the tomatoes are going to be up to here. What happens next? Where do they go?
Yeah, where are they going?
So what I did is I made this little device that slides right on top of the T-post, and they call these T-posts because you look from the top, it looks like the letter T. This slides in. I got a bolt in here to keep it from sliding down, and then I tie the plant up through these loops to keep going up.
All right, Mr. Todd, we appreciate that demonstration.
Thank you,
we
man.
look forward to seeing how these grow throughout the season.
I sure hope they do.
All right. There are a number of gardening events going on in the next couple of weeks. Here are just a few that might interest you. All right, we have Miss Carol Reese herself. She's the horticulture specialist with UT Extension. We're going to be talking about landscape planning. So where do we need to start with that?
Well, I think a lot of people think about it In a lot of, I always think that the first thing they should do is start from inside the house looking out the windows. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people go outside and look at the house. And I think a lot of it should not necessarily even about what it looks like, but that they should consider what I want that landscape to do for my family. In a dream world, how are you going to utilize your outdoor space? And there's so many ways that it could serve you. If you like to do outdoor grilling or entertaining, if you need a place to play sports with the kids, if you've got pets. A lot of people now like to grow their own food and vegetables and herbs and have edible landscaping space. And of course, my passion is gardening for wildlife, so that's a thing. But I think all that should come first with make that landscape serve your family and your lifestyle, make it a happy place for you to live. And then think about how to define that space for those needs.
Okay. Now let's talk about foundation plantings and its origins.
Well, it was started really because in the old days, a lot of our houses started way up high off the ground, you know, to keep them away from the termites and the wood rot, wooden floors and such. And if you look at European homes or even old style homes in this country, they did not have the foundation plantings. That was a recent, probably about the Victorian era is when it began. So they began to do it so that the house didn't look like it was floating up in the air, and now it's simply a bad habit. And so people are sentenced to pruning their shrubs. And there's no way that that serves their lifestyle. In fact, I think it's a detraction from their lifestyle. All that time you could spend out enjoying your landscape, instead you've got to keep those shrubs from swallowing your windows. And why? Why do we do this? You know I taught landscape design with an English woman, and she said, you Americans slam all the shrubbery against the house, and you put an oak on either side of the sidewalk, and you think that's a landscape design. And she actually defined landscape as defining outdoor space for user needs.
For user needs.
So every family is going to have different situation, pets, kids, elderly, whatever it is that you like to do. So I think every family could be put into the same house and the same landscape and should have something different.
Sure. Wow. I wonder why we do that. Yeah, we do slam everything up.
Yeah. So then once you've defined those needs, and I say just do a simple balloon sketch. I don't go with all that, do a detailed landscape plan, because for one thing, it's very difficult. I think it's easier to design on site. But say you wanted to define different areas of your landscape for different uses, that this is going to be where I'm going to grow edibles, and this is where the kids and pets are going to play. Then you're sort of like building a house. You're going to define it with walls, which may be actually structural, or they may be plants. You might even think about ceiling. You either have open sky because you want the sunlight on your vegetables or your rose garden, or you want shade because it's where you're going to hang out and grill in the afternoon and want people to sit outside and enjoy. So that will determine your sky, your roof rather, then your walls, and then your floor. Is your floor going to be turfed because you want to run and play and need a place for the pets, or do you want to have a no-mow landscape?
Yeah.
That's a great way to go in the South. I always quote my old friend Plato Tulliadis, that the easiest garden to have in the South is the woodland garden, because the South wants to be woods. So we know that's true. If we plow a field and leave and come back in a few decades, we're going to have a woodland. So woodland gardens need some work and some editing, certainly, but they're certainly easier to work in than the hot, sunny garden.
Sure.
So.
Sure. Now let me ask you this then. The average homeowner is probably thinking, I can't design my landscape. I mean, where do they need to go to get the resources to be able to do this?
Well, the Master Gardener classes, I think I show, of course I teach your landscape design class and show lots of slides that demonstrate these ideas. But I say, look out your own window, over your sink, wherever you spend time, and if you don't like what you're seeing, you're the artist in charge. So block those things you don't enjoy seeing. If nothing out there you enjoy, create something, a vignette for you to enjoy through the seasons. And I always tell people to think about all 4 seasons that you can enjoy. But you're the artist in charge of your views. So just start there. And what's your priority area? You know, pick one and just start there and begin to work. And also, I don't want people to be afraid, because I keep hearing this right plant, right place thing, you know. It makes it sound like you've got to get it right the first time, and then your landscape will be perfect for here and forever. And that's just not true. It's going to change over time. So your needs out of it. Plants get bigger than the tag said.
Yes.
Areas that used to be shady become sunny when a windstorm comes through. And we change our house.
Yeah.
We redesign our house. We put a window in. We change the floor. We paint. You can move plants. You can cut them down. You can add to. So I know you don't want to have to do a lot of that, but it's going to happen. And one of the great comforting things I read was every great garden's been in the wheelbarrow 3 times. So I think that's one thing, if I can do anything, is just relieve people's fear to just get out there and try something.
Yeah.
Now, are there times to hire a professional? Absolutely.
Sure.
I don't want to do a whole lot of work to drain it or build structures. And also, I think every time I've ever hired a professional, they gave me an idea I hadn't thought about.
Right.
So just having another brain in on there can be a good idea. So that might be a place to start, just to pay somebody to come out and do consulting.
Okay. But yeah, I definitely want to ask you that question because I get it a lot. People, well, I don't know anything about landscape design. How do I go about doing this? So it can be
Right.
relatively easy, or it could be as hard as you want to make it, right?
Yes.
Just kind of depends on what you want.
And I start, people say drag hoses
Yeah.
around to define beds. Hoses are heavy.
Yeah.
I like to use that light plastic rope you can buy at Walmart or
the
wherever.
nylon ropes.
Yeah, and just tie it to a couple of stakes and hammer it out. Define your beds, and bigger is always better. You're going to fill them up faster than you think. And then just put some stakes in the ground where you think you want the plants to go,
That's
and write
smart.
the names on them and move them around and make adjustments. It's really not rocket science.
Yeah.
I think anybody who can design a beautiful interior room or can do a great flower arrangement, same principles. No matter what field of study you're in or what art form, even music has
Yeah.
similarities. Because you want some structure, some melody line, some rhythm, and then you want some improvisation on that. And the improvisation is where it starts to get kind of fun, That's when you start getting into the
about
pretty
that?
stuff instead of the functional stuff.
So you can have music in your landscape. I like
Yes.
that concept.
Yeah, because think about the boring ones that you see. You've seen one of those.
Right.
And if you sang that, it would be na 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 na
Yeah,
na.
I like that.
We don't want that. And also, I think a lot of people think they've got to have grass.
Yeah.
When the shady landscape really loans itself to not having grass, and that moss can be a beautiful asset. And a mossy floor as your flooring can be fantastic in the woodland garden. More people are getting into that now.
Yeah, they are. All right, well, thank you for that information.
Okay.
All right, I hope that'll be a good start, for our homeowners who
Yeah.
are interested in landscape designing.
Good.
All right.
Me already, so.
Oh, good.
All right, here's our Q&A session. Okay, and Mr. Tom, you jump in there with us.
Okay.
Here's the first question. I want to start a vegetable garden. How much sun do I really need to grow things like tomatoes, peppers, and squash? So we'll let you have the first crack at this one.
Ideally, it would be 8 or more hours, but a lot of the plants will do okay with 6 hours at minimum. Also, too, I recommend when you plant your vegetables, if you can plant them in rows, plant them north and south. Since the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, both sides of the plant will get sun. Whereas if you plant them east and west, you might have some tall stuff shading some smaller stuff. So always plant east-west. And like I said, it's minimum 6.
Okay. Let's get anything to add to
I
that?
agree. I think a lot of people, and I also hear a lot of times people want to know how to grow herbs inside. And I go, really, there's just not enough light inside. You really want that sun. I agree with you. A lot of times I'll read 6 hours is enough, and they're not real happy with 6.
Yeah.
8 or more.
8 or more.
Yeah, strong sunlight.
That's what they're looking for. Even your herbs, right? They
Oh, yeah.
Still want about 8 hours of sunlight. Okay.
Yes.
All right, here's our next question. The lettuce seeds that I planted last month did not germinate. What happened? What do you think happened with that, Mr. Tom?
Well, like I have mentioned numerous times, there's warm season vegetables and cool season vegetables. There's hardly I know of any hot season or cold season. Now, lettuce is a cool season lettuce. Unfortunately, here in the Mid-South, our springtime is so if you plant the seeds outside, before they even have get big enough to where you even think about pulling them, they're already burned up from the heat. Most lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, we start them indoors anywhere from 4, preferably 6 weeks before the expected frost-free
But
date.
don't you think when people do that, a lot of times they plant them too deep?
Yeah, they do. For example, lettuce seeds aren't very deep, so big.
Yeah, that's real
So
tiny
the
seeds.
three normal depths is 1/8, 1/4, and 1/2. And most of them usually go 1/4 inch, but lettuce seeds are really fine, so you don't have to plant those very deep at all. Also, too, she did not mention what type of
Right.
lettuce. Like in a leaf lettuce, you got the 2 popular ones is Butter Crunch and Black-Seeded Simpson. Do not even think of iceberg lettuce, the big bulb ones. Those you got to grow up north in the summertime or someplace where it's
I
cool.
find a lot of beginning gardeners too tend to keep it too wet.
That's
and
what I think.
Soil gets
I think they
cold,
keep it too wet.
Need warm.
I
and-
do.
Yeah.
Well, in any case, she said about a month ago, so that'd be really into the cold area.
Yeah.
And I don't know if she started them indoors or outdoors.
Right.
Right.
I recommend that does very well in our area is romaine lettuce. I've had no problem starting them and growing them. They can take the heat a little bit better. They're slower to bolt, you know, where they go to seed. So if I was going to plant any kind of lettuce, and it's not really classified as a lettuce, but I would plant romaine. The only problem with that is they all come in at the same time. And unless you're a rabbit, how are you going to consume all that lettuce?
Because it would be a lot, wouldn't it? All right, well, you know what? That actually leads us to the next question then. We'll talk about planting. Is it safe to plant tomatoes?
Traditionally, our frost-free date is about April the 15th.
All right.
But the way it's been warm, and if you go on the news, they usually have, or on the internet, 2-week forecast. Right now, oh, absolutely. It's safe. As a matter of fact, I hope it is because I started a couple cherry tomatoes, well, actually 12 of them, in those pasteboard 8 cartons. On their birthday was January the 5th. That's when they popped up. And I just put them one out in the garden. It's about
Let's
that
knock
big.
on wood, Tom.
Yeah,
Knock
you
on
better
wood.
knock on wood.
But
Well, I'll tell you
I'm
what.
with you. When we get close to April 15th, I always look at the extended forecast, and then that's kind of.
And if I have to, and we get a little frost, I'll be out there going,
Trying to keep them alive.
oh, I remember one summer, we had frost about middle of May.
It can happen.
And wiped out a lot of gardens because the plants were too big to pull up and put them in the garage. And the nurseries had already stopped production on tomato plants and pepper plants. So that year it was kind of a thin garden time.
All right, so let's just knock on wood and hopefully we can get it done. So here's our next question. How do you get rid of moss? We're getting that question a lot here lately.
Have you? See, I thought we'd turn the tide. Recently I Googled how to kill moss and I got 3 million hits, but then I Googled how to grow moss and I got 18 million hits.
Uh-oh, that's telling us something then. People are growing
People
moss.
are growing moss because, as you and I know,
Yeah.
to grow grass, you're going to have to change those conditions entirely.
Got to.
Moss loves compacted acid soil and shade, and turf grass hates all that.
Yeah.
So you've got to drastically change those conditions. I understand if there's a slippery area, maybe a little patch in your turf grass that's ruining the perfect look that you want, then iron sulfate or copper sulfate
yeah.
will kill that moss. So
I actually have a little moss in my backyard. It doesn't bother me one bit. It actually, stays green.
Yeah.
Kind of looks like grass almost.
It's beautiful.
It's nice. I know.
Great.
I've been out to Diane Mauchi's place.
yes, Gardens Oive, it's fantastic.
Looks nice.
I send people out there when they want to get rid of their moss because I think I can convert them within 5 minutes of getting out of the car. It's just like, oh my gosh. And remember when you were a child and you went out in the woods, where were your magic places?
Yep.
Always the moss.
Places with a moss. Hung
There's-
out. How about that? So what? You just keep the leaves off of it for the most
That's
part?
the real trick. If you already have moss there, it wants to be there, and what will smother it is leaves.
Yeah.
And if you just blow the leaves off, or they actually sell special bamboo rakes the Japanese use for getting,
that?
for moss gardens. And moss garden has gotten to be real big.
Okay. Can you start moss from just
Yeah,
little pieces?
I'm glad you brought that up because
Okay.
you read a lot of crazy stuff
Yeah,
on the
I've
internet
seen some of
about
that.
buttermilk.
Buttermilk. Yeah, I've seen that.
Throw
Yeah.
moss and buttermilk in a blender.
In a
blend it
blender.
all
I've
up and
seen
pour it
that
all
same
out.
thing.
Well,
I've
you're
seen it.
destroying the moss structure, really.
Okay.
I mean, you can crumble it, certainly, if you maybe hit it just a pulse or two, but you don't really need to do the buttermilk. That just adds a little bit of acidity is the thinking.
Oh, okay.
But no, you just crumble it over your bare areas and keep it moist and shaded, and it will spread and fill in just fine as long as you keep the leaves off. The buttermilk thing might have one application, and that is if you're really wanting to age a piece of concrete, maybe a statue, make it look old, or an urn, then the buttermilk might make that kind of cling a little bit and help that moss to adhere. But you could do the same thing by putting that pot under a damp, shady bench and encouraging some moss to get on there, and it'll spread quickly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moss likes high pH soils.
No, opposite.
Low for source
But doesn't
fertility.
sulfate lower the pH?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
but a lot of it will kill it.
Oh, Oh, it's not too much. That's like anything.
Yeah.
Just knock it right on out.
Yeah, just like water, you know. Too much water, you will die from it. It's called drowning.
All right. Remember, we love to hear from you. Send us a letter or an email with your gardening questions. Send your email to familyplot@wkno.org. The mailing address is Family Plot, 7151 Cherry Farms Road, Cordova, Tennessee, 38016. That's all we have time for today. Thanks for watching. I'm Chris Cooper. Be sure to join us next time for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Be safe.
Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by Good Winds Landscape and Garden Center in Germantown since 1943 and continuing to offer its plants for successful gardening with 7 greenhouses and 3 acres of plants, plus comprehensive landscape services. International Paper Foundation, the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.